You answer every text within minutes. You say yes to every favor, every request, every last-minute plan. You're the friend who drops everything, the employee who never logs off, the person everyone knows they can count on. Always. You pride yourself on being reliable, on being there, on never letting anyone down, and yet, somehow, you feel empty, exhausted, like you're living everyone else's life except your own. You watch others, people who seem more selfish, who say no without guilt, who disappear for days without explaining themselves, and they appear more confident, more creative, more alive. They have hobbies you've never heard them mention. They take trips you didn't know they were planning. They seem to know something you don't. And you're left wondering, what's wrong with me? Why do I feel so drained when I'm doing everything right? But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the real question is, what lie have I been living? From childhood, you were taught that being available equals being good, that saying yes makes you valuable, that if you just keep giving, keep serving, keep being there for everyone, you'll eventually feel fulfilled. But what if that formula is backwards? What if the very thing you think makes you worthy is actually keeping you from discovering who you really are? Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who mapped the hidden territories of the human psyche, understood something most people never realize. The person who is available to everyone is often unavailable to themselves. And until you learn to say no to the world, you'll never say yes to your own life. The trap of endless availability. Here's the uncomfortable truth about always being available. It's not actually about helping others. It's about avoiding yourself. Think about it. When was the last time you sat alone with your thoughts? When did you last pursue something purely because it interested you, not because someone else needed it? When did you last feel excited about your own plans, your own dreams, your own voice? Jung would tell you that your constant availability is a form of psychological escape. You stay so busy meeting everyone else's needs that you never have to confront the terrifying question, what do I actually want? This isn't your fault. Our culture has trained you to believe that self-focus is selfish, that boundaries are mean, that saying no makes you a bad person. But Jung saw through this lie. He understood that the person who never says no to others is actually saying no to themselves every single day. You're not being kind, you're being afraid. Afraid of disappointing people, afraid of conflict, afraid of discovering that maybe, just maybe, you don't actually know who you are when you're not performing for someone else. And that fear is costing you everything. Jung's vision, the journey to yourself. Jung called this journey individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are, not who everyone else needs you to be. But here's what most people don't understand about individuation. It requires separation. You cannot discover your authentic self while you're constantly plugged into everyone else's expectations. You cannot hear your own voice while you're always listening for someone else's needs. You cannot build your own life while you're always available to live theirs. Jung understood that we all wear masks, what he called the persona. It's the version of yourself you present to the world, the role you play to fit in, to be accepted, to be loved. For you, that mask might be the helper, the reliable one, the person who's always there. But underneath that mask is your authentic self, the person with unique desires, boundaries, dreams, and needs. The person who might actually want to stay home on Friday night, who might want to pursue that weird hobby, who might want to travel alone or learn something new or simply sit in silence without having to justify it to anyone. The problem is, as long as you're always available, that authentic self stays buried. Because being authentic means sometimes being unavailable. It means having a life that others aren't automatically invited into. It means protecting your time, your energy, your attention, like the precious resources they are. Jung would say that your refusal to set boundaries isn't noble, it's a betrayal of your own soul. The psychology behind the yes. So, why is it so hard to say no? Why do you feel guilty when you even think about being less available? Because somewhere along the way, you learned that your worth depends on your usefulness. that love is conditional on your availability, that if you're not constantly giving, you're not worth keeping around. Maybe it started in childhood. Maybe you were praised for being the easy kid, the one who didn't cause problems, who always helped out. Maybe you learned that getting attention meant being helpful, that being loved meant being needed. Or maybe it's deeper than that. Maybe you've made being available your entire identity. Who are you if you're not the person everyone calls? What's your value if you're not always giving? This is what Jung called identification with the persona. You've become so attached to being the available one that you can't imagine existing any other way. The mask has become your face. But here's the thing Jung understood that most people miss. When you define yourself entirely by your availability to others, you're not actually connecting with them. You're performing for them. You're not showing up as a real person with real needs and real boundaries. You're showing up as a service provider, and deep down, everyone can feel the difference. What really happens when you set boundaries? You think that saying no will push people away. You imagine the disappointment, the anger, the potential loss of relationships. But Jung would tell you something different. The people who get upset when you set boundaries are the people who were benefiting from your lack of them. Real friends don't disappear when you become unavailable. Real friends respect your boundaries because they want you to be happy, not just useful. When you start saying no, something magical happens. The people who are just using you begin to fade away, and the people who actually care about you, they stay, they adjust. They might even admit they were worried about you, that they could see you were burning out. You discover that relationships built on mutual respect are so much deeper than relationships built on your constant availability. You realize that being choosy about your time makes the time you do give more valuable, more meaningful, more real. But more importantly, you discover yourself, the new world that unfolds. When you refuse to be always available, you don't just change your relationships, you change your entire life. Suddenly, you have time to think, to explore, to create, to rest, time to remember what you actually enjoy, what you're curious about, what makes you feel alive. You might discover that you love morning walks when the world is quiet. You might find yourself drawn to photography or writing or learning a new language. You might realize you've always wanted to travel somewhere specific, or read certain books, or try a hobby you never had time for. You start having conversations with yourself, real conversations, not the constant mental chatter of obligations and guilt, but actual dialogue with your own thoughts, dreams, fears, and desires. You begin to develop what Jung called your own value system, not the values you inherited or absorbed from others, but the principles that actually matter to you. You start making decisions based on what feels right to you, not what makes other people comfortable. This is what Jung meant by becoming whole, not perfect, not selfish, but complete. A person who includes their own needs in the equation, a person who has something real to offer because they're not running on empty. The shadow side of availability. But Jung was too honest to pretend this transformation is simple. He understood that our seemingly noble behaviors often hide darker motivations. So let's be honest about why you really can't say no. Maybe being always available makes you feel superior. Maybe you like being the person everyone depends on because it gives you power, control, a sense of being special. Maybe you're addicted to being needed because it's the only way you feel valuable. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you're so afraid of being alone, so terrified of rejection, that you'll do anything to keep people around. Maybe your availability isn't generosity, it's desperation. Jung called this shadow work, looking at the parts of ourselves we don't want to see. And until you're honest about why you can't set boundaries, you'll never be free to choose differently. The person who can't say no isn't just kind. They're often controlling, manipulative, or deeply insecure. They give so much that others feel guilty. They create relationships based on debt rather than choice. They make themselves indispensable so they can't be abandoned. This isn't love, it's strategy, and it's exhausting for everyone involved. Learning to say no without guilt. So how do you start? How do you begin to reclaim your life without becoming a selfish person? Start small. The next time someone asks you to do something, don't answer immediately. Say, "Let me check my schedule and get back to you," even if your schedule is empty, even if you have no plans. Because here's what you need to understand. Your time doesn't have to be filled with important things to be valuable. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is nothing. Sometimes protecting your empty time is protecting your sanity. Practice saying, "I can't make it," without explaining why. You don't owe anyone a justification for having a life. You don't need to prove that your reasons are good enough. Notice the guilt when it comes up, and Jung would tell you to sit with it. Don't run from it by immediately saying yes. Ask yourself, where does this guilt come from? Whose voice is it? What would happen if you disappointed this person? Most of the time, you'll realize that the consequences you're imagining are either unlikely or manageable. The world won't end if you're not available. People will figure it out, and if they can't, that's their problem to solve, not yours. The art of selective availability. This isn't about becoming cold or unreachable. It's about becoming intentional. It's about choosing where to spend your precious life energy instead of letting it leak out in all directions. When you're selective about your availability, the times you do show up become more meaningful. When you choose to help someone, it's because you actually want to, not because you're afraid to say no. When you spend time with people, you're fully present because you're not resentful or exhausted. You become someone who has something real to offer because you've taken the time to fill your own cup. You become someone worth knowing because you've taken the time to know yourself. Jung understood that authentic relationships require authentic people, and you can't be authentic if you're always performing, always available, always saying yes when you mean no. The courage to disappoint. Here's the hardest truth. Becoming yourself requires the courage to disappoint other people. It requires accepting that some people will be upset when you change, when you start having boundaries, when you're no longer available on demand. And that's okay. That's actually necessary. The people who are meant to be in your life will adjust to the new you. They'll respect your boundaries because they want you to be happy. They might even be inspired to create some boundaries of their own. The people who can't adjust, who get angry, who try to guilt you back into constant availability, those are the people who are using you, not loving you. And losing users isn't a loss, it's a liberation. Jung called this individuation the process of becoming a separate, whole person. It's not easy, but it's essential, because until you learn to disappoint others, you'll keep disappointing yourself. Your life is waiting. You have one life, one chance to discover who you really are, what you really want, what you're capable of creating when you're not constantly serving everyone else's agenda. That life is waiting for you on the other side of no. It's waiting for you to protect your time, your energy, your attention, like the sacred resources they are. It's waiting for you to remember that you matter too. Not because of what you do for others, but because of who you are. Not because of how available you are, but because of how alive you are when you finally give yourself permission to live. The new world Jung promised doesn't unfold when you keep saying yes to everyone else. It unfolds when you finally have the courage to say yes to yourself. So ask yourself, what would happen if you stopped being available to everyone and started being available to your own life? What would you discover? Who would you become? Because that person, the one who emerges when you finally set boundaries, when you finally protect your own time and energy, that person has been waiting for you all along. And the world needs that person more than it needs another exhausted people-pleaser. The choice is yours. You can keep living everyone else's life, or you can finally start living your own. Which will it be?